Okay. Well, welcome everybody. You want to say hi, Spencer?
Hello.
Yeah. So for those of you who have seen any of my live streams before, we're doing something a little different today because we have a guest. This is my good friend Spencer Baird.
Hi.
Um, yeah. So if you guys saw any of the promotion for this live, you'll know that what we're talking about today is comics and layouts and that specific part of comic making. I think we're gonna call this maybe do a series of live streams and call it crafting comics is the working title. If you guys think that's stupid, let us know in the comments. If you think it's awesome, let us know in the comments. Yeah. Um, we should probably get going on this pretty quick because we have over 100 slides to go through. Um, but for everybody who is out there, Spencer, would you like to introduce yourself really quickly? And I can also do a brief introduction if this is your first time interacting with either of us.
Yeah. Sure. I'm Spencer Baird. I'm Marcus's friend, and we went to school together. But I'm a comic artist as well. I've done mostly small short story projects up to this point, but I'm working on getting a larger webcomic in the works in the next few years. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's me.
Cool. Yeah, and if you don't know me, I'm Marcus. This is my channel. Welcome. And I'm a comic artist and creator as well as a paleo artist and toy designer. Um, so I talk about all of that over here. If any of those things are interesting, you should subscribe. My biggest thing is my webcomic series, Heaven's Hymn. It's a high fantasy adventure. We just crowdfunded the first volume earlier this year, and I'm already one chapter into the second volume, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's like a sixth of the whole volume. So hopefully I have to I'm gonna need to talk to Spencer actually at some point this week about what I'm doing because I've had too many ideas for that story that I've been thinking about for too many years. So we're gonna get started. Comic layouts. So welcome. As a kind of a preface, we're focusing on comic layouts kind of first in this thing about potential series about making comics because comics are kind of all encompassing, right? And it can be really easy to get caught up in the draftsmanship, in how to draw in perspective, how to streamline a drawing process, the coloring process, and all of those different things. But if the layout is bad, right? If the paneling doesn't work, then none of that else matters, essentially. And also, one of the things that is unique to comics that doesn't apply nearly as much in other forms of storytelling, even in storyboards, right, where it's still sequential telling a story. Not necessarily, there's a lot of crossover, but it's not the same. There's a lot of specifics about comics. Anything you want to say before we get going, Spencer?
No, sounds good. Let's jump right in.
Okay. Quick disclaimer. So all of the theory that we're talking about is based on Scott McCloud's understanding comics and our own experience. So as a disclaimer, going into it, we are just two guys. So we don't know everything about everything as much as it may seem like it.
I can talk this one too. We have a bias toward conventional narrative. Like both Marcus and I are telling pretty I don't know if straightforward is the best way to say it, but we're wanting to tell stories with our comics, and comics are a big medium. They can do a lot of different things, including a lot of really experimental, fun stuff. But we tend to focus on where we've got a story, we're telling this kind of thing.
Okay. We have a bias towards the American independent graphic novel movement as well as European graphic novels. Artistically, those are kind of our two favorites, though we do love all of them. These are the realms that we operate in the most and have, kind of gear our work towards.
And we also have bias towards fantasy, sci-fi, and action adventure stories. So we can speak a little bit to more sort of quieter stories, but that's where we're coming from. So
yeah, and we've tried throughout. There's a ton of examples of a ton of incredibly talented artists. We've tried to get pretty diverse examples from different industries, different genres, so that it's not all one thing. But regardless, we want to make sure these are evident so that if you are writing a slice of life romance, you know from where we are coming from and then how to best apply that in what you're doing. So why listen to us? These are essentially our credentials. We touched on this a little bit. Hi, I'm Marcus. I have a BFA in illustration. I'm the creator of the Heaven's Hymn webcomic series, which again just got its first volume crowdfunded and printed earlier this year. And there's going to be a lot more. And I've done a lot of comic short stories beyond that. I pass Spencer.
Yeah, and I'm Spencer. I have a BFA in animation. Marcus and I met through school pretty much. We knew each other a little bit before college, but we really started becoming friends in college. This is my webcomic, which is a babble that I've been posting on Instagram. I am an award-winning film director. The film that I made last year won the student it was one of the winners of the Student Academy, and it won the Student Emmys as well. And I also do a lot of comic short stories in various different things. We've made an anthology together, and I've done a bunch of other stuff too.
Okay, sweet. Sorry, my wife just called me. Yeah, so storytelling in comics. The purpose of every storyteller, right, is to create a story that elicits emotion from their audience. We want people to connect with our stories. And comics are fundamentally narrative. We are telling stories in our comics, which is, kind of the goal, the whole point.
Yeah, and to do this, a storyteller needs to achieve at least 2 objectives. Are you good, Marcus?
Yeah, sorry. Apparently, the stream is set for kids, which it is not supposed to be, and I don't know why YouTube keeps doing this. And I didn't think you could have a live stream set for kids, so I'm gonna change this really quick, because this is not that this is inappropriate for children, but this is not targeted at children. So why I'm frustrated. Okay. We will get back to this shortly.
I should do a little dance.
You should do a little dance.
Is there a way?
There we go.
I guess. Oh, no, you
fixed it. It is not made for kids. Well, what it is if it's set for made for kids, it's not going to show up on anyone's feed unless they are a child. And no child is going to click on this to watch it, and if they do, they're not going to stick around for very long. So
just headshots of dudes talking about I don't know, there might be some kid out there who's super into comics. I probably would be into this when I was a kid, but
yeah, that's true. It depends on how old you are as a kid too. We underestimate where kids are at, but I also want this to show up in other people's feed, because I don't think most of my audience are children. Anyway.
All right.
Okay. So storytelling. The purpose of every storyteller is to create a story that elicits emotion from their audience. To do this, the storyteller needs to achieve 2 objectives. There we go.
You got to get your audience to understand what you're saying and get them to care.
Yeah. If you don't achieve one of these 2, it's not going to work. Yeah, so story versus storytelling. You don't have to do anything super crazy to make a meaningful story. I think people tend to get caught up, right? Thinking that they have to be breaking down walls to tell a good story, or to touch lives, or to... Oh, wow, the chat was disabled. Thank you, Kelsey, for letting us know. Kelsey just said she was wondering why the chat was disabled. If you're in the chat and want to engage, please reload so that it can work. I don't know why YouTube said it as such. I need to be better at making sure things aren't set as for kids. It's frustrating. Anyway, we get caught up thinking that we have to break barriers every time we create something in order for it to be good or meaningful, but you really don't in order to tell a good story.
Yeah, so some of the most unforgettable stories in comics have been told super straightforward. So this is a page from Persepolis, which is one of my favorite comics of all time, and it's very understated throughout the most of the telling of it. And not that we're not, I'm going to make it clear that we're not talking about necessarily like the visuals themselves. Like you can have like really nice, good art. But like the panels, there's pretty straightforward panels throughout this whole book. But because it's talking about stuff that's really, I think is really important, and it's from a very unique perspective, the story works.
Yeah. Similarly applies to Death Note. If you've ever read the manga, it's pretty straightforward, even though the story itself is not necessarily straightforward. But the paneling and the layout, there's not a bunch of weird things happening. It's pretty simple comic mechanics that are at work. Which hopefully after this you'll understand how all of those mechanics work and can use them. But yeah, you don't have to do anything super crazy. So yeah, depending on the story you're telling, you might need to do. Yeah, you might not need. Wow, I can speak. You might not need to do anything too fancy to satisfy your audience. But
if your audience doesn't understand what you've done, they're not going to care. So this is why we say clarity is king.
Yeah. So how comics work, right? What we're just starting with basic fundamental process. There's this principle called blood in the gutter. This is coined by Scott McCloud, which is the idea that most of the action, almost all the action in comics, happens in between the panels, right? We look at this page from Clovis by Miles Greb, and we have this series of actions kind of accumulates in the throwing of this spear at the deer, but we don't see much of anything. It's very implied. And the idea is that you're guiding the reader through a series of images to understand what is like, to help them piece that together. So as the reader, you're putting that together, and the action happens as the panels transition from one to another, not in the panels themselves. The magic happens in the transitions. Okay. You want to take this one?
Yeah. So there are, again, this is also from Understanding Comics. Basically, most of the things that we're talking about are from Understanding Comics. I'll stop referencing that book, but it's very good, and everyone should read it if they haven't already. But there are basically 6 different types of transitions you can have in a panel. So there's moment to moment, action to action, subject to subject, scene to scene, aspect to aspect, and non sequitur. And we'll jump into like what those all are.
Yeah, so a moment-to-moment transition, we can see in this page, these 2 panels are having that kind of transition where we are essentially the same subjects, same action, just 2 different parts of it, right? It's the smallest amount of time has passed of any transition, right? Where we're going from here to here, essentially. It's very small, and it works very well for showing very specific events and very specific actions.
So
the
again,
bottom 3 panels.
Yeah.
So
I kind of the way that I think about moment to moment is it's a little bit like you're almost thinking of comics in terms of animation, like you're doing animation frames, and we're slowly zooming in. So on the bottom 3 panels, you're slowly zooming into the girl who's standing in front of the door, and it gives this kind of a very slow, kind of methodical approach to the way that you're reading it.
Yeah, it's adds a lot of time into your page, which we're going to talk a bit more about, like the implied time of like passage of time in comics as we get to pacing later in here. But moment to moment is really great for adding a bit of time and taking time to show smaller things and establishing time. This one's a bit of a fun one with the transitions there. Okay, action to action.
Yeah, so action to action is you have one transition. One panel will show one thing, one action, an entire action, and then the next one will be another action or a reaction from that. So it's kind of like the next level up from moment to moment. So rather than showing like, I mean, with the last example, it had like, I don't know, 20 panels doing this very slow metamorphosis of the guy into the rock. These are very, very relatively quicker transitions. So, the girl is jumping down, she lands, she sneaks past a guard, she jumps on top of a tower, and she is away from the city. So all of these transitions are basically the next logical thing fit inside that action. And that gap can be as wide as you want it to be. As a comic artist, that's kind of one of the fun things about comics is you can have, the guy runs and then he falls, and you don't have to show all of the frames between him falling or any of that, but you can if you want to.
Yeah. The next one is subject to subject, which again, similarly, is kind of the next step away as we're kind of backing out from this moment. And this is where we go from, person to person, right? So you use this a lot in like conversations where someone will say something and we'll cut to someone else reacting to what they're saying or their response. And we're just bouncing kind of between the two perspectives, the two subjects who are engaging in whatever's going on. You see it occasionally also with like action if you have subjects who are doing things. You use it for managing multiple people and multiple like ideas going on at the same time and bouncing between them.
Yeah, I'd say another
another
part too with subject would be like someone looking at something and then you show what they're looking at, right? Like that'd be probably the next most common use of the subject to subject. So it's switching points of view from looking at one thing to looking at another thing as well. It doesn't have to be people.
Yep. And then so the next one. Oh, I'll take it. Yeah, scene to scene. This is your scene changes, right? You're going from location to location, and you can follow the same characters. You can follow different characters. Sometimes it comes with an intrinsic like subject change as you go from one scene to another scene. But the biggest thing is location and time. You're changing where and when we are at in the story. So this is a big jump. And kind of we're talking about with like time between moment to moment, there's very little time. With scene to scene, there's a much bigger implied gap of time that can range from, a minute, like, going into a room or going out of a room to, a huge time gap in the story you're telling. This is just a fantastic example of a scene to scene transition that just takes its time to really let you sink into the new place you're at and feel like you're transitioning. Cause it's like between the two pages, right? We hit the transition starts at the bottom of the first page and continues on to the whole rest of the second page. And it's beautiful. We love Stand Still, Stay Silent in Minasan Berg.
Mm-hmm. This one's kind of a fun one. Yeah, from Demon Slayer, where it's a character and she's in, a current day sort of scene, and then she's having flashbacks to earlier in her life, and they're interspersed. So it's actually jumping back and forth from that first panel to that second panel is a background, and then goes back to the present day. She's kind of hyperventilating, and then it switches back near that bottom middle panel. And then back to the present day. So it's kind of flip-flopping back and forth and it's juxtaposing the two different times together. So there's a lot of things that you can do with scene transitions that are quite poetic. And I just thought this was a cool example of that.
Yeah. Well, and kind of what we're talking about with time, right? When the scene to scene transition, it doesn't have to necessarily be like location to location. It can be, time to time. And you can do all sorts of fun stuff with that. The next one is aspect to aspect. And this is one, it is interesting because kind of as we're talking about time, right? Like it expands as we've been going from small time passage to bigger time passage. Aspect to aspect almost exists in a form of transition outside of time. But it's where we take a scene and you're just seeing elements of that scene back to back. We're not following necessarily the same character throughout. We're not following the same actions in there. It's establishing different elements of a scene or of a setting. It's really good for establishing mood and building the visual world that your audience is engaging in.
Yeah, this is another example of that by good old Jake Wyatt. And you can see in the bottom, there's all these different moments of this kind of chaotic scene of this raid on this village, and they're not necessarily connected causally Like you're not saying, oh, like this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's all kind of happening in this one moment that exists like simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really effective. Again, for helping your the other thing that I'll say for aspect to aspect is it does a lot for building, I think, immersion in a lot of ways, because you can use it in an establishing shot or in a new scene to establish like the little details that we would be seeing as we're walking past. Going back to the Mina Sundberg example, we in that second page, it's also a series of aspect to aspect transitions within the scene to scene transition that add a lot more depth and detail to the broader scene by bringing us into where, if you're in this space, you're going to be looking at these little things. You're going to be there with the characters in this environment. And so it does help with immersion as well, in world building for your audience, I think. And yeah, another just great example we see down here with the kids on the playground and such. The different aspects kind of establishing the vibe of what's going on. It's school. Wow. But yeah. Okay. You want to take the non sequitur?
Yeah. So then the last type of transition would be a transition that doesn't necessarily connect in any sort of logical way. So a lot of experimental comics will do this, or if you want to throw like a nonsense gag or something like that. So this is an example from someone's portfolio of a comic that's essentially connected mostly through, I think, those shapes, like the cubic shapes. So there is like a connection there, but it's not necessarily a logical connection. It's more sort of a meditative sort of exercise.
Yeah.
And
no, you finish.
I don't know what I was going to say. Sorry.
I was just specifically, it kind of breaks the narrative rules, right? We're not following there's a sequence, but the sequence isn't a story that takes place in time. We're not bound to that anymore. If that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, so tendencies. Stories that rely heavily on plot will favor the action to action transitions, subject to subject, and scene to scene. These are just, if you have a lot to plot to cover, these are going to be the most efficient ways to get through it, especially if a lot of that plot is action based. And so that's kind of the tendency for there. I'm going to pause right here because we do have a question. Becca asked, which is my wife, by the way. I love her. She's great. She asked, where does like characters who break the fourth wall fit in transitions? I think that would generally fall on a moment to moment, right? Because if you have a character there, they say something to another character and they pause, look at the camera. I would say that's a moment to moment because we as the reader aren't changing our subject. We're not changing the shot. It could also be an action to action. You could do that. It would be hard to do that with subject to subject. But it also kind of falls outside of transitions and more just into general dialogue and the way that it's working. You could work it into most forms of transitions. It's more about the specific dialogue that you have to have a fourth wall break in there, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if I have an example of this, but I'm thinking about this isn't a comic, but did you ever read the like Three Little Pigs book where the three little pigs like break out of their story and like go to
I know the one you're talking about. I don't know if I read it, but I know it.
Yeah, I imagine you could do something kind of clever with comics in that way, where like they're breaking out of the panel and they're then interacting with like the person outside. But I don't know if I would call that a transition necessarily. That might just be like being playful with the medium and where things are going.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the tendencies, in emotionally driven stories, we tend to utilize subject to subject, aspect to aspect, and moment to moment transitions more. As we can see, if you compare and contrast the examples, right? Lots of action to action, subject to subject, and scene to scene, whereas here it's almost entirely moment to moment and subject to subject. With a few, I think there's one that you could consider an aspect, but yeah.
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 The feet, like her walking.
Yeah.
What you're thinking?
Yeah. So again, the rules that you will employ and the tools that you will focus on depend largely on the stories that you're trying to tell. And so be aware of that when you get into making your stories, because it impacts everything. Okay, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah. So also with comics, when you're thinking through layout, so this is kind of just more a little drawing. Welcome, little Rachel.
Yeah.
With with drawing, a comic page doesn't necessarily need to be balanced in the same way that like a piece of an illustration does. So it's best to think of things as holistically because you're adding multiple panels. So this is a panel from All-Star Superman, which Marcus and I both very much love. And if you saw
we'll
this,
have to do a live stream where we rant about Superman for a few hours, because
Marcus and I both adore Superman. In case so if you look at this single panel, though, it kind of feels a little jank. Like I don't know if I'd hang this up on my wall because there's a lot of like empty dead space. But Marcus, if you go to the next slide.
Yep.
Oh yeah, yeah, it'd be awkward and balanced. But when it's in context, it kind of evens out, right? Like you get that bright red of Superman kind of balancing the page. And so because there are multiple panels on a page, you kind of have to think of the whole page as an image, as well as individual panels as an image. But I've found personally that it works better if you're thinking of the page, because that's what people are going to interact with first, compositionally.
Yeah. The other thing to consider when we're looking at the kind of basic composition in comics is the use of line and oh, thank you. I love you. Becca brought me a cookie. Is the use of like lines and diagonals. Lines carry energy and draw the eye. And so using verticals, horizontals, and diagonal lines will help to achieve that, right? If you look at the example, the lines that are created through the forms and the panels guide you through the story pretty seamlessly in a way that feels really interesting and dynamic and engaging, which is what it's trying to do. It also just brings a lot of interest when you have good use of line. I'm never going to say that diagonal is superior to horizontal or vertical or anything, because again, it's about using them well, not one being better than the others compositionally.
This is kind of an interesting thing that Marcus and I have also noticed in terms of utilizing both horizontal and vertical spaces in comics. So even the panel that you're using will change the feeling of what you're doing. So these are two different action scenes. The first one has pretty bland panel shapes, I would say. They're basically the same size and same shape, but it still has quite a bit of action. And I think that they're getting away with this because of the way that they're using the camera, right? The camera is creating these really strong diagonals. They have some really crazy forced perspective, especially like that shot where her foot is like super close to us and she's running towards the people in the background. And I would say that this is probably more close to, say, like a cinematic approach. When I'm doing storyboards and stuff, I'm thinking in terms of this because you can't really break the bounds of what you're drawing in. But there's a lot that you can do with framing and pushing perspective and that kind of thing. And then if you jump over to the other side for this Hulk comic page, there's a lot of uses of actual changing up the shape and size of the panels to create a lot of interest. So you've got really strong verticals for these vertical actions. I love on the far right, the panel where she's jumping up in the air. And you have this big vertical, you feel the verticalness because of the vertical panel. So you can actually play with the shapes of your panels and the direction of your panels to reinforce sort of the action that's happening behind there. Or you can go the other route and you can reinforce the camera angle to push what you're trying to say.
Yeah, it's one of the fun things about comics is that you have that extra dimension of abstraction that you can play in with shots. But that also doesn't mean that you have to do that, because I think looking at both of these, no one in their right mind would argue that one feels less interesting or flatter or less dynamic than the other one, right?
Yeah. I will
It's just too.
say I do think that they're giving off different I
Oh,
think
100%.
the first page feels more like a film. Like it feels more like film to me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one feels more like an artwork, a piece of artwork, like something like
Yeah.
an art piece that you're interacting with. And so I think it depends on like the kind of vibe you're wanting. Whether or not you're wanting someone to like interact with the page as a whole and interact and experience it as a piece of art, or whether you're wanting them to zoom in on like the individual like frames and really get involved in the story, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And both
Yeah.
can lead to involvement in the story.
Yep. Yeah. Again, kind of what we've been saying the whole time is a lot of it just depends on the kind of story you're trying to tell. And so you want to understand what different choices will do to impact the reader's experience. But then the other thing to note, when we talk about panels, right, sometimes I see blanket advice. Kind of, this is something we're trying to disprove here, that like if you want something to be dynamic and action packed, have diagonal and like choppy panels. You don't need that. But I will say you will have a hard time making something feel routine or stable or slower paced if you have a bunch of really diagonal, triangular, dramatically shaped panels. Because if you look at both of these examples, they both feel pretty even. They both feel calm, like this is something more normal, more routine that's happening, as opposed to either of these, where it's like this is bombastic, dynamic, action packed. These feel a lot quieter. And I think you're going to have a much harder time getting that quiet mood and that stillness with panels like something on the right. But if you want to establish, again, that mood and that quietness, hard to beat some nice, good horizontal shots and having some structured, horizontal and vertical lines in your panels.
Yeah, you can just think about if you're on a hike and you start taking photos of nature, like what do you do with your camera? You immediately turn it horizontal. And I think we're just used to seeing nature and scenes in that context of these very large horizontals. So I think that's the natural response to seeing a horizontal panel.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of like we exist in a three-dimensional world, but we operate on kind of a two-dimensional plane, right? We stand on the ground and we can move. We can't go up very easily. And so the up and down is a lot less important to us, hence why our eyes are to the side of each other, not vertical like this, right? Because we're not trying to see more up and down, we're trying to see more left and right. If you want to get evolutionary about it, the predators aren't coming from above, they're coming from the left and the right. But like we as humans operate in that world. So when we see something that fits in that, it's a lot, usually one, easier to process, and two, yeah, feels a lot more stable, like Spencer was saying, which is something to understand if you want that effect, or if you want to break it, you can break that in the panels you're doing.
I can take this one. So
yeah, okay.
the thing that you're also thinking about in general with the use of line inside your panels is also the lines that exist inside the panels. So using lines to format and lead the eye is something that illustrators have used for centuries, and that applies in comics too. So these are some really excellent panels done by Scotty Young that basically showcase like he's leading your eye exactly where he wants you to look as we're following Dorothy as she goes on this journey through Oz. I really like the top left one, but like on the bottom, where it's basically all the lines in that whole panel are just leading to Dorothy there, and there's this big empty space around her, so that we can see her.
Yeah, and as a point of clarity, if this is kind of new to you, we're not talking about like the line work of the comic, right? This isn't the ink work. These are the compositional lines, like Spencer was talking about, guiding the eye through the page, not specifically how the inking is done. We can do another workshop presentation thing about that if people are interested down the line. But Yeah, here's just
One
another
thing
great example. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say with this one thing that's kind of cool is line work can also lead your eye across panels too. So it's not just inside panels. I think it's really cool that the lines of her sliding down this tree or this mushroom, I guess maybe is what it is in this, is that it's actually leading you to the other panels, as she's sliding down. So there's like an action to the line, that's moving you across the page.
Yeah.
I think we got
something...
a yes with the inking in the chat.
Okay. We'll work on more. There's you can talk about comic craft for years and probably not get through all of it. As with any craft, there's just so much to break down, and we could talk for hours and hours on end. So we will gladly oblige if people will listen to us.
If we have to.
If you insist. Yeah, here's some just other fun examples of the use of line and composition. Using characters breaking out of the frame. Kind of on the left example, the top set of panels, we have one character moving through the same space, but using panel lines to break up time, even though that's the same shot. Almost working like an animation without having to like draw the same shot each time. It's really interesting how that works. And then like how she's coming up into the last panel in the middle section with the red behind her head is really interesting, and just using that to make add clarity, right? It helps us know what is most important here. The real focal point of this whole page is this lady on the bike at the very end coming in. And so having that red and the colors and the lines guiding you there, it all culminates to that. And so as the audience, you pick it up and what is most important, which we're going to touch on in a little bit. Do you want to talk about the Wonder Woman panel page, Spencer?
Yeah, I think the Wonder Woman panel is super cool because it's basically doing what the top couple of panels are doing in the other page, but they've gone a step further and they've completely removed the sense of panels from the drawing. And now we've got multiple Wonder Womans traveling down, and it's kind of just up to the audience to understand that, it's a convention in comics to draw images multiple times, and so it's not literally duplicate Wonder Woman's. But I love how they've been able to reverse the natural flow of action as you just follow the staircase down. So you're going in a zigzag pattern down the page rather than just going left to right, which is really quite cool because at least in the West, we read comics from the left to right. So it's cool that they've been able to go left to right and right to left and just go back and forth really quite seamlessly.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable how readable this is with how much is going on and how complicated the illustration is.
Right.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, perspective can also be a useful framing tool. And again, this is incorporating the compositions within panels within the broader context of the rest of panels. You can use the elements within the scene. It can be perspective. It can just be the architecture, right, as a form of its own panel around characters and around figures. This is something I love to do in Heaven's Hymn, where I have a bunch of medieval architecture. So there's all these arches and stuff. The chapter I just finished almost entirely takes place in a church. So there's so many arches and pillars and stuff that are really, really useful to use to set my characters up in places where they are readable and clear and understandable, and almost make frames within frames or beyond them to tell the story I'm telling and to make it understandable and impactful and interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you take the 180-degree suggestion.
Okay, so this is this is the 180-degree rule / suggestion. This is something that I took from my animation days, and it's just a rule to help keep things simple. And basically the idea is that things that are on the left side of the page or the left side of the frame stay on the left side of the frame as you move through a scene. So I've got this set up here. Imagine you've got character A on the left here and character B on the right here, and there's a line between them. And we've got a camera set up, and so we can see character A on one side and character B on one side. So the 180-degree rule basically says we can move the camera at any point along the like one side of the line, and people won't be confused. This happens in film all the time. Like this is literally how they film it. They set this up and they put the camera on one side and they're moving the camera back and forth between these two characters. So we can have A closer, we can have B closer, and it doesn't matter. The problem comes when you start moving the camera on the other side, because now B is closer to the camera on the left and A is closer to the camera on the right. And so you've swapped places with them. And again, this happens a lot in film. It can be quite confusing if you were used to seeing the character A on one side and now he's over on the other side. He's jumped sides of the screen. So a good rule of thumb is to keep basically, you can go to the last slide there. Yeah, that one. So basically a good rule of thumb is you have the A space, A character space, and that's on the left side of the screen, and B character space, which is on the right side of the screen. Or in comics, it's on the panel, right? The reason why we say that this is a rule or a suggestion, not a rule, is because sometimes in comics it might be necessary to actually flop characters, or it's not as big of a deal. And the reason for that is because there's a direction when you're reading comics, a left to right direction or a right to left direction if you're reading a manga, and it is generally more important to keep the momentum going in the direction that characters are reading. So that's why we say it's a suggestion. It's kind of not a hard, fast rule, but just keep it in mind that flopping characters around every single panel, like if you switch from one panel to another and you're just flopping back and forth, it might get confusing for people. So hopefully that was understandable for people. We're going to jump into some examples so that we can clarify that.
Yeah. So if we look at this page from Inuyasha, right, the characters are in their own spaces, right? Kagome is always on the left and Inuyasha is always on the right. Even when we have them overlapping a little bit or one's closer, we get dynamics, we get interest, we can get interesting like transitions between the two. But we're never questioning where they are in space. We always know what their like spatial relationship to each other is, which makes it a lot easier to understand what what's going on. And beyond that, it's not distracting from the emotional impact of this part of the story, right? Whereas we compare it to this page, which we could not find what it's from or who did it.
If anyone recognizes this comic, just put it in the chat. And we're not trying to throw shade at this artist. It's just like, obviously this is beautifully drawn and there's a lot of really amazing things. I would kill to be able to draw like this guy or girl. Yeah. But I can be gender neutral. Or gender neutral. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. This person. I was a little confused though when I first saw this page, where in the bottom left panel, the guy switches sides. This blonde-haired kid switches sides for that second, where they're grasping hands. And I think the biggest reason for me is it's kind of confusing because I wasn't sure which side he was on, and maybe any of you looking at this are like, oh yeah, no, like obviously it would it's that guy and it's fine. But I think the biggest thing for me is there's not necessarily a reason to have this back shot that they do, other than it just is kind of there. And it's framed nice in the sense of like putting the character's hands in the open space and stuff. But for me, it was confusing, and I could see that being confusing for some people. Yeah. Again, it's not that this ruins the page. It's that it becomes something that can be distracting or confusing, which is hard. And you want to avoid, because again, clarity is king. Also, really quickly, if anybody does have any questions at any point in time, please shoot them in the chat whenever. We're kind of going quickly just because this is a pretty long presentation. But if you have questions, pop them in the chat. We'll try and answer them as we go. Or you can save them to the end and shoot them to us at the end. We want to make sure we're actually addressing the concerns that people have, or if anything is not clear, or if people have more insights to share too. Like if you have an idea or something to add, please also shoot that into the chat.
We want to hear what you guys have to say. But yeah, anyway, another thing to consider with the 180-degree rule is that it can force some interesting relationships on the page, right? If we look at this page from Spera, we get to the bottom, and our character, she looks up, she sees the sword, and she's looking off of the page, which could be a weird dynamic. It's not that this is bad. What it is that it draws the reader off the page at the very end, which leaves you feeling like unsatisfied, the unresolved, which again can be a very useful tool. In the case of this page, actually, it's the first page in a spread, so she's looking up and it guides us directly into the next page and is really, really effective. But there are cases where sticking to the 180-degree rule leaves us in awkward positions where, like, if that panel was in the middle of the page and she was looking off to the, upper right hand, it would completely interrupt the flow of the readability of the page, and it would feel kind of jarring to get through. Whereas, where it is now, it works really well. So it's something that you want to be aware of, and kind of what, like Spencer was saying, there are cases where to make the page work better or look better, be more readable, you actually want to break it. But those are generally the exception, not the rule. So if you're just starting out, try your best to stick to the 180-degree rule would be our recommendation, until you feel confident enough with what you're working with to start breaking that rule and to start really pushing outside of that.
Which is probably a good advice for any rule that you hear, right? Like any rule. It's just like try to figure it out first, and then do what you want with it. I don't know, or maybe just do what you want. We're not going to tell you what to do.
You're right. Except we are going to tell you what to do with this one.
Yeah. So then this is 180. The 180-degree rules like baby sister, and it's way worse. And so this is the principle of directionality. Basically, if you have something moving in a direction off the page, and then the next panel it's moving in the opposite direction, that can be kind of confusing to people. So don't do it. And with this example, like he's throwing the ball from the left to the right, and then the ball comes in from the right to the left, right? And if it's not meant to be the same ball, I mean, that's fine, right? But it can be confusing to know where that ball is coming from, and it can get really, really confusing very, very fast, especially if you're doing complicated action. If you're not keeping the direction the characters are moving in mind.
Yeah, and the other thing too to be aware of is the direction in which we read, right? If things are going from if you're writing in the context of an American or European comic, right, that's being read left to right, and you have an action going from the right to the left, then what it's doing is it's pulling us back, and it kind of stops the flow of time a little bit. It feels weird, like we're sitting there and our eyes are pulled back to where we just were, and it doesn't feel like you're advancing nearly as comfortably or as clearly or as understandably as you would otherwise. And so
sorry, no, go.
No. Okay, yeah. So yeah, great. I'll let you take the next one. Great example here of directionality from Spy Family, where we are reading. Firstly, remember the manga, so we're reading right to left. So as we follow the action, we follow this punch. We start at the origin of the punch being the person punching, right, to the victim of the punch, and then we come back down, and the action continues going in that same direction. She doesn't punch him, and then suddenly he's flying from left to right. He is continually moving, which just makes the action feel understandable. It makes it feel clear. You know what's going on. You can follow it, which makes you then care about it. I've read lots of comics where things like this don't happen, and so there's all this action going on. It's drawn like it's supposed to be this big, impactful, interesting, dynamic moment, and it just feels like I don't know what's going on, and that's never good.
Yeah,
so I think not as great example. Or
I was just gonna say with the Spy Family, that middle panel, like, that lives rent free in my brain.
It's so good. It's so good.
Anyway.
Anyway,
Okay. So this is an example of that could be kind of confusing for some people. So we have Scott Pilgrim on the top panel. He's moving left to right. He's running, and then we have this kind of middle panel where he's kind of just moving back in space. And you can read it either way. He's either moving right to left or moving left to right. And then in the next, but I'm reading it more right to left. And then the next one, it's again left to right. And then the last one, he is now facing from the right to the left. So this is a page for me. Like when I first read it, I was like, it's just a little bit disorienting. And that might be kind of what Brian Lee O'Malley was going for when he was making this Scott Pilgrim comic. But I really do feel like if he had kept everything moving in one direction, it would have just felt slicker, personally to me. And so, and it could have been confusing for some people. Like I don't know if I 100% get where the stairs exactly come from, that he falls down. So just things to keep in mind. And again, I mean, Scott Pilgrim is ridiculously successful. So maybe don't do what we're telling you, but also do. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, what we're saying is like some of the best comics and most impactful comics aren't perfect comics, and you're not going to make perfect comics. Neither of us make perfect comics, right? I'm sure we've both messed up with directionality when we haven't been thinking about it, or plenty of other things. But you're not going to get better unless you're thinking critically about it. So none of this is to say that Scott Pilgrim is bad or that we don't love Scott Pilgrim. It's great.
No, Scott Pilgrim is really good, and you should all read it.
Yes, exactly. But there are things that you can see and learn that will inform you how to do what you want to do better. So we kind of framed, like all art rules, right? Or rules with heavy air quotes. There are exceptions to that. And directionality, well, I'd say pretty staunchly, if you're doing action in a single scene, you want to maintain that as best as you possibly can. But if you're showing a character covering a lot of ground over time, then you don't need to maintain that directionality in the same way. If anything, breaking the directionality helps to imply that this has been more time. The fact that our character in this page, he's going from, right to left and then left to right and then right to left. It shows that he's going different places over time, right? This isn't one walk from one spot to another. He's making a journey, and that makes it feel a lot more like it's a consistent journey because it's not all just in one direction, if that makes sense. I don't know if you had anything more to add before moving on, Spencer, but
let's move on.
Okay. Yeah.
How's that for graphic design? All right. So this
Can
is a
you
word
tell
about
that we are not graphic designers, but are comic artists?
So speech bubbles need to be designed as well. And that's one of the biggest things that I think like you need to keep in mind about speech bubbles is that you actually just have to think about them. And if you're thinking about them, you're already ahead of, I think, most comic book creators.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a page from Heaven's Hymn. This is from chapter 2. So we're going to do a little thought experiment, right? I have these speech bubbles, right? They look fine. We're going to play with the idea of breaking up word balloons by thoughts, not necessarily just by who is speaking and when. So we look at this page, right? It looks fine. But if we look at this page, I want you to take a second, like, notice the effect that breaking up those bigger speech bubbles in the third and fourth panels here. So of Ran, our blonde dude here, breaking that up into two different like chunks of a speech bubble is still technically the same bubble, but we have that divide, makes it feel a lot more conversational and a lot more natural to read, because now instead of having to break down this big chunky paragraph of text into the different ideas and thoughts, we just have thought 1, thought 2, thought 3, etc. And it makes it a lot easier to follow, and it feels a lot more comfortable to read. Especially if you're like me and are dyslexic, having those big chunks of text in a comic feels like you're hitting a brick wall when you're reading it. But you can have all that same amount of text, right? The dialogue is not changed at all between these two pages, but it feels so much more accessible, so much more breathable and interesting and dynamic when you break them up by the different thoughts that are present in the discussion and in the bit of dialogue that you have.
Yeah, the other mistake that we see a lot of, so you can break it into different thoughts, but if you're not giving enough space for the words and the art, it can start to feel really, really claustrophobic. So this is a quick drawing that I did. It's just a conversation between two characters, and you can see that the dialogue is like really starting to crowd and be claustrophobic for the art. Which if you're going for that, great. But if you just maybe draw the panel just a bit bigger and like give the characters just like a little bit more, they have their individual space, and what they're saying has individual space, then that just makes it feel more like something that a reader would want to read. Like I feel like I can digest that, versus the earlier one where the art and the words were competing with each other.
Yeah. Another thing to note, this is probably the most common like piece of advice that I see people give for speech bubbles, is to also make sure that you have enough room in the speech bubble for the text. So if you look at the bottom right speech bubble in this one, the I and the E and like all of these letters are choking up against the edge of the speech bubble, and it's really uncomfortable and hard to read, right? Like it's creating these tangents, and that's making it hard. We have a question. So before we move on, so yeah, little Rachel asks, in my comic, there are some characters that can imitate the voices of others. I was planning on distinguishing characters and showing voice switches. I was thinking of using different colors for text. Do you think there may be a better way to do that? I don't know if you have any specific thoughts, but this is something that I've seen a lot in other comics. A great example of one that does something exactly kind of what you're talking about is Ava's Demon, which is a webcomic and graphic novel. Really, really good. But all of the characters have very specific text that they speak in. So there's a specific speech bubble color, specific text color, so that you always know who is speaking when they're speaking, and that this is important for other plot reasons that like comes into it. So I think honestly using color is a pretty efficient way. The one thing that could be dubious is if you have a big cast, right? Ava's Demon is very effective because for the most part we're following like 4 characters for most of the story. At least where we are, we're meeting more, if as the story continues progressing. But if you have like a big cast of like 12 characters, that might get a little hard to have 12 distinct looking colors. But I definitely think that that's a really effective way of doing it. So I feel like that's a pretty solid idea. You could try using different fonts, but I think you'd run into the similar thing where you'd run out of fonts that work. If it's something like there's like a monster voice, right? I've definitely seen some where like this, this character, when it's them or when it's the beast inside talking, the font will change into something to, more beastly and dangerous looking. But I think a lot of it is balancing how many characters this character is going to be mimicking, and then also reinforcing that with the writing, making sure characters have distinct voices so that when they're imitating someone, it reads like that person is talking, even if you don't have the visual cue, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only thing that I might say is colored panels can sometimes be hard to read if you don't get enough contrast between the text and the color of the panel behind it. So that'll just be something to watch out for, as well.
Yeah, someone just shouted out Bad Ink Studios as well in the comments. I don't know if you've seen Bad Ink Studios, Spencer, but I love their stuff. It's really, if you want to deep dive into like the nitty gritty of lettering specific, like we are barely touching on this, but they really get into it, and it's really, it's really helpful. It's been helpful to me, and so again, this isn't about lettering. We're just touching on speech bubbles for a little bit. They do a really good job of going deeper into everything we're talking about here, and it's really good. Mixing.
I'll look them up. Sorry.
Yeah, you would like what they do. But yeah, I think I'd play with it, Rachel. Like it's definitely interesting. So yeah, trying to do a combination I think would be good. And again, I think there's a lot of clever things you can do with the writing specifically, but that's also probably where it's going to be the hardest to make it compelling, if you're leaning on the writing. But I think if you can develop it, it's going to be really compelling. And there's also just like clever things that you can do in the story to make it clearer. It's like they imitate someone and someone else responds with that other character's name, to establish like, oh, they're speaking as this character. So yeah, that's it's a very specific and very interesting problem to solve in comics, and I think it's fascinating. So I don't know that I have a whole lot more that I can add for it. Yeah. Okay, I think we will move on. So how much text is too much text? This is a part where Spencer and I's bias will show a little bit, because we were both in the camp of the less text the better when it comes to comics, to a degree, right? We don't necessarily, you do want dialogue, and there's a lot of meaningful dialogue, and it has to be in there, but it's also not something that needs to be like this. You see a lot in especially older American comics, there's just so much text. And the more text it is, the harder it is to read, and the slower the pacing gets. It's going like reading through this page, it doesn't really feel like you're like having it's a much less cinematic experience, and it's a lot more like you're reading a book with accompanying illustrations, right? Like you have some moments where characters are in there talking and like engaging, but it doesn't feel as much like this is all happening like in a tight sequence as it is this broader thing, just because of how much text there is. It feels a lot slower. Yeah, not to dog on old comics, they're fantastic.
One thing I was going to say, just so we're absolutely clear, we're not talking about like the amount of words, we're talking about the ratio between the words and the images. So less words to images will generally give you a faster reading experience. And more words will generally start to feel a little bit more like a novel or like prose. So if that's the vibe you want, I mean, go for it.
Yeah. I will say, I just picturing like this page, if we even just had 2 panels for each single panel that's in here, made it 2 pages, like it would be astronomically different, the rate at which it feels like the story is going, which is just a good time. More text also gives, like Spencer said, a more prose-like quality, pulling away from the cinematic storytelling. I'll let you speak on this for a sec.
So if you want a good example of words to text, I think look no further than Mike Mignola. But word balloons, they act as compositional elements as well. So when you're thinking about, think about word balloons as part of your image. And you can use them to lead the reader's eye throughout the page. So if you see these word balloons, they actually are like leading you along to look at the actual image. So in the one panel, Hellboy's saying Alice, and you go down and you see him, and he's got this beautiful like light spot against dark. And then you kind of come over to the other area of high contrast, which is these 2 guys speaking, and they've got connected. And then you go down, and then the panel or the word balloons lead to the next panel. Anyway, it's just if you want to know how to design a comic page, look no further than Mike Mignola. And he's always doing amazing things with word balloons and using them to lead the eye throughout the page in a compositional in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, if I had a nickel for every time I have referenced a Mike Mignola page when trying to figure out how to lay out scenes and such, I'd be a very rich man. Because, fantastic resource and fantastic just everything. He's so good. Okay, so in pacing, this is kind of the culmination of everything that we've been talking about, because pacing is so important for comics, because if it's well paced, you'll maintain interest, and if it's poorly paced, you will lose readers really fast. So there are a number of rules like everyone pacing in comics, but by far the most important one is the more stuff takes longer to read, right? If you have more panels, it's going to take longer to read. If you have more text, it's going to take longer to read. If you have more speech bubbles, it's going to take longer to read, especially if it's more proportional to the page. Also by stuff we may include panels, bubbles, environments, characters, details, even within panels, sound effects, or anything else that can be on the page. And there are different conventions when it comes to this, with the kind of three main comic industries, those being European comics, Japanese manga, and then the American comic industry. I'll turn to you, Spencer.
Yeah, so European comics, you can probably already see this, but European comics are printed very large. They're like usually 11 by 14 or bigger, and they tend to have anywhere from like 9 to 16 panels on a page, and they are just usually packed with stuff. So you can, every panel has an environment, every panel has a character interaction, every panel has a word balloon. Not every panel, but a lot of them do. And it just takes you a while to read through them. So the feeling that you get when you're reading European comics is it's a very slow walk through like an art gallery, and you're experiencing the art and really like delving into the specific brush strokes that people are using to draw the characters and that kind of thing. So they're very artistically minded, not almost to the detriment of story sometimes, where it's like it's more about just appreciating the beauty of the drawing.
But then you also get very, very good illustrations and just art in general.
Right. They can draw better than pretty much anyone else.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I mean, that also happens when you're spending like a week on each page, which is not a luxury that most anybody else in any other comic industry can really afford. Kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of like number of panels and such is manga, which is in a much smaller format, right? I've got some fruits basket right here, actually, which you can see. If I compare this to my French book, I'm pretty sure the Galliard's French, like big size difference. The manga is much smaller, usually in black and white. By usually, I mean I think basically always in black and white, and has a much faster kind of page pace because there tend to be a lot fewer panels. I think I read something like the average number of panels per page is like not 5, when compared to like in European comics where it's like 10 plus or something like that. I don't know. I haven't done a study on that, but I remember someone saying something like that at some point. It might have been Tim McBurney in one of his Drawing Codex episodes, which if you want another great resource, Tim McBurney is an Australian comic artist who works a lot primarily in the European comic industry, who does podcasts and like YouTube advice and like workshop tutorial kind of stuff. He's phenomenal. I don't know if we have any of his stuff in this in the live, like in the presentation, but he's really good.
A lot of good too.
But yeah, another thing to note with manga is because like you have fewer panels per page, there tend to be a lot more pages, and it kind of prioritizes story above art in the way that like the French comics prioritized art and like the visual experience over story. Manga tends to do the opposite. Not that the art isn't also phenomenal, right? The art is really, really good, but it's much faster. There's tends to be a lot more panels with no or fewer backgrounds, right? If you look at that Dragon Ball Z page, there's no environment, right? The Fullmetal Alchemist page, we only have the bedroom, and it's not super complicated when you compare it to like the Sinbad page previously, over here, where almost every panel has a complicated environment in it. It's a very different experience, and that lends itself to different kinds of stories and different interactions between the reader and the narrative.
Yeah, I think the other thing too that we haven't talked about is the amount of pages that is typically in a volume as well. So most European graphic novels will be like 80 to 100 pages, and manga will be like, if that, and then manga will be I don't know, like 100 to 200 pages, but they'll run for like 20 volumes or something like that. It'll be
if not
thousands
more.
if not more.
Yeah. And then lastly we have American comics, which are interesting. It's kind of an interesting middle between the two, but not because they don't fit neatly on this like single spectrum of industries. But it is kind of the middle where it's like, you go.
Oh, I was just gonna say at least in terms of length and panel size or panel number, they tend to be kind of in the middle. You tend to get anywhere from like 1 to 9 panels on a page, sometimes more, but usually not. And then they usually end up in the 150 to 300 page range. So
especially if we're talking graphic novels, it works slightly differently when you have like a serial comic book. But even then, those usually fit pretty neatly into arcs that are then made into graphic novels of 5 volumes ish. So like it's pretty consistent in the being in the middle of it all. So where we both work in kind of the American style, that's kind of what we can speak to. So the standard American comic has between, like Spencer said, 1 and 9 panels per page, and sometimes more. I guess you can't have I guess you could have a blank page. You could have 0 panels in a page. But I don't know that I usually see a random blank page in any comics. But
it could be like all black or something. Wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be all black.
That's an image, I guess.
But remember, hierarchy is key with all of these panels. So we've kind of talked about clarity is key. Going through how to be clear, how to like guide the eye so we can follow the action, know what's going on, the types of transitions. And this is something we kind of touched on earlier, but a part of clarity is hierarchy. We group things in a level of importance, right? So when we know what is most important in the page that we are showing, it helps a lot in helping people understand the story that is being told, if that makes sense. Okay. Are we ready to move on to this guy? I'll let you take the reins over here.
I think so. Kelsey, did you have a question or?
Oh yeah.
Was your comment about something earlier? I'm not. Anyway, if you do,
I'm not entirely. Yeah, let us know. We want to make sure things are clear, but I'm not entirely sure what you're referring to. But we're here.
Okay, so the ideal, and it's an ideal because it's not always possible, but the ideal is to make every single panel indispensable to your storytelling. That's where like pure comic storytelling is if you don't have any unnecessary panels. So we're just going to take an example of this. Again, we don't know exactly who this artist is, so if you guys know who it is, you can say. Gotcha. The no panels. Kelsey said she did have no panels, but it did have text, so it might not count.
Yeah, I don't know if I would count that as like a 0 panel, but I mean, I guess panels and bubbles are different.
Yeah, they are different. I think Kelsey might.
We'd have to take it up in comics court, I think. See what a comics jury says.
The famous comics court. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just going to go through this, and we're going to take out individual panels for this page and see what you miss. So the page as it is right now, you have a scene, the kid sitting on this rock. He reaches into his pocket, he pulls out a jar, he puts the bug into the jar and puts the jar back onto his belt, and there's a bug that lands far away, and he gets excited about it. So he's going to see another bug. So if we get rid of it, or I guess this could be a girl. I'm actually not sure if it's a guy or a girl in this.
This kid.
This kid. So if you miss the first panel, then you don't really know. I mean, you can get context clues because there's environment in the other panels, but you kind of miss out on the opportunity to really know where this kid is, right? You just see this kid get startled and he grabs a jar and puts it into the jar and he puts it on his belt, right? And then if you take out the next panel, a kid's sitting on a rock and he has a jar and he has a bug and he puts the jar on his belt and the bug lands far away and he sees it. So you miss the context of him pulling out the jar. We don't know where the jar came from. It just is suddenly in his hand. And then if you lose the next panel, then the kid's sitting on a rock. He messes around with his belt and then he stands up and there's a bug that he notices.
This is probably my favorite one to take out because you have no idea what's going on at all without that panel. You're like, I guess there's a kid in a rock and a ladybug ? Yeah.
So take out the next panel. So a kid sitting on a rock, he pulls out a jar, the bug lands on a leaf and the jar disappears and he is excited about the bug. And then on this one, you don't really know what the kid's excited about. He puts the jar away and then he gets excited. And you can kind of see that there's a bug on the plant, but you can't tell that's what's exciting the kid. The kid's just suddenly standing and excited. And then if you get rid of this last panel, we're transitioning to a new scene where now the bug's the hero, right? So it's just very, very important to make sure. This is actually a good exercise to do if you have a comic page and you're like, something's not working with the story. Just start covering up your panels and be like, oh, maybe these panels are unnecessary, or vice versa. You can be like, oh, maybe I need to add a few panels or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Odds are, if something's not reading for someone, if you show it to someone else and they don't understand what's going on, odds are you probably need to add a few more panels.
Yeah, and the other thing that I will say too is like we don't want unnecessary panels, but I want to be careful with how we apply the term unnecessary, because sometimes we're like, well, you could technically convey this same kind of idea without taking each of those 3 panels in the middle, right? Like we got most of it without the one on the left. We just saw like, oh, kid puts a thing in the jar, puts it on his belt, right? Like the most important one in that middle section is the middle panel. But what we miss when we don't have the other 2 is the sequence, like the time that is giving the audience to understand what's going on. The flow is interrupted and it feels very different. Even if we're getting the same general gist of kid has bug jar, sees bug, wants bug, right? That's about what it boils down to. We miss a lot of the nuance and the subtlety. And so there's a lot of cases where like you could optimize your comic to have as few panels, but kind of what Spencer was saying, like the clarity is diminished when we take those panels out, as is the sense of time and the sense of like narrative that we have when we're reading it. So don't just axe anything that isn't strictly like moving the plot forward, but axe things that aren't enhancing the clarity and the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a lot of different things that you can say on a page. Like Marcus and I talk a lot about how something we got from when we were both reading and studying Hellboy. There's a lot of like throwaway panels in Hellboy, and they're basically just there to establish a mood. But if you take them out, then you lose the experience that you get when reading Hellboy. And both Marcus and I have tried to involve that in our storytelling because we really like the feeling of being involved with the story, and we really like the feeling of a very strong sense of presence in storytelling. So I do think it's important to recognize that there are like it's important sometimes to add extra panels for other things other than just like these are the plot beats that have to get hit.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, I'll actually let you keep talking on this one because this is your page.
Yeah, so this is a page that I did for my comic, and this is an exception that I found, and I don't know if it works. So if you guys are like, this is not working for me, let me know. But I feel like you can get more than one idea in a single page or a single panel if you have something in motion that has been previously established. So in this example here, I have this monkey character and he's running through the town, and then he pushes off this plant and jumps down. And because we know that the plant is in motion already, because he's pushed it off in a previous panel, in the bottom left panel, I feel like I could get away with saying two things at once, or I guess three things at once, which is that he's falling, the plant has hit the bench, and the bench flying up to meet him. And so that's I think I could get away with it because it's related action to stuff that's already been established, and it's furthering an idea that has already been set up. So I think that there are exceptions to the rule where you can say more than one thing in a panel, but I think a general good rule of thumb for good pacing is to just say one thing at a time.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I'll add too is like say one thing. And I think the biggest thing to focus on there is like the hierarchy of what you were saying. Because part of why this page I think works for you, Spencer, right, is because it's clear what we're focusing on. So like we see that there is a bench there earlier, which makes it less jarring when we see the plant, crash on the bench. It's like, oh yeah, that's the bench that we saw, even though the bench isn't the main idea that we are establishing in that earlier panel. It's a secondary idea that is being established that we're yet to interact with. And so that's another thing that you can do, right, is introduce ideas, but only discuss one per panel. I think might be a more nuanced way of putting it, because you want to focus and have things be clear, right? You don't want to be trying to say two things given the same weight. But if you are saying, here he is looking down trying to figure out where to get there, there's also a bench there. That's not distracting us because that bench doesn't feel out of place. It's not drawing undue attention until we're interacting with it, and it's like, oh yeah, we make sense because there's a bench there. We saw it earlier. Even though that shot is not there to establish that the bench is there entirely. So I think to just add on to that idea and to why this page works for you, in juggling all of that.
Yeah, I hadn't really ever thought of it that way, but that's a really good way to put it, I think.
Yeah, well, and it's an idea that ties into a concept that we're going to get to here in just a sec about narrative tension, right? Because we want people to be asking, we want to ask questions and provide answers, which we're going to get to in a sec. But yeah, we're going off where Spencer's saying. We're going to get to the tension in a minute, but first, establishing shots. This is just a really important thing to keep in mind and I would say to be doing in general in almost any story, because it informs the audience so much on what we're expecting and the space in which we are engaging. Because some people, I think, are scared of establishing shots because they tend to be more detailed. You have to do backgrounds and environments, and then it's this big intimidating thing. But when you don't have establishing shots, you never establish the shot. You don't establish the mood. You never have the opportunity to negotiate with the reader of, this is the experience that you're about to have. This is the kind of story that I'm trying to tell you. And so we have this establishing shot on this page, right, where it feels calm. It feels normal. We're in, this kind of woodsy, suburban-y, area where there are roads, but houses, but also trees and deer. And it feels normal, but there's a sense of beauty and maybe some subtle foreboding to it, but not super intense, right? It's pretty calm. When you contrast it to the establishing shot here, it's super dynamic and super interesting and super big, especially because this one comes after two action shots, right? Two closer up. We get some other stuff going on in the second panel, but we start here and we kind of build this momentum up to this big shot where we see where they are, and we see not only the space that they are in, but the kind of way that the characters and thus us, the readers, are engaging with that space. It informs us a lot about who they are, where they are, and the story that we're about to be told or are being told right now. I don't know if you have any more things to add before moving on from this is basic idea of establishing
Mm,
shots.
yeah, I just think establishing shots are really like one of the things that I think Marcus and I especially like look to like uh, to help ground us in like the worlds that we live in. Like when we read comics, we generally want to be transported to whatever world it is, and it doesn't have to be like a fantasy world, although we do love fantasy. It,
We both
it could
have
also,
fantasy comics.
but we really want to feel like we're part of the place, and I think that is something that is particularly like lacking in a lot of newer comics, like web comics especially, just because it does take time, and we're living in a world that like requires things to go faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
But I really do think it creates a difference in your depth of experience with a particular work when you slow down and actually show off where characters are at.
Yeah.
So that's my pitch
So
for it, is that it will make
yeah.
a difference.
And especially if you're doing science fiction or fantasy, the audience can't infer nearly as much about the nature of the world as opposed to if it's set in New York, right? An American audience already has a big pre-existing notion of what New York is like because we've watched movies or been there or lived there, all those other things. But if this takes place in the magical realm of Castafar or whatnot, and we have no context for that. And so it's really easy for a lot of science fiction and fantasy to end up feeling really generic just because they don't have the specific, we don't have the time to see the world, be the world, and be the unique world that it is. Because when you're left to fill in the gaps, you fill the gaps with what you've seen the most. And that makes something generic. So if you're doing science fiction and fan, you can get away if it's slice of life comedy. I don't think you should because I think it still adds a ton. But especially if you're doing science fiction or fantasy in any way, shape, or form, you got to get good establishing shots and just good environments and let people see your world. It's silly if you spend all this time creating a story and don't want to take the time to show the world that you've spent all this time on. Um, that's me on my little soapbox. Spencer and I have talked a lot about this,
We
and
should
you'll
probably make
see
if people are
what.
interested, we should probably make a whole video about world building. Honestly, I feel
Yeah,
like we probably
yeah.
lots about it.
Let us know in the chat if you guys want us to do a whole thing on world building in comics and how to establish that. Okay, I'll turn it back to you now that I've talked for a bit.
Yeah. The other way to establish mood or sorry, your world is through what Marcus and I like to call mood shots. And this is kind of related to the aspect to aspect transitions that we talked about earlier. But it's basically just adding extra panels or even a whole extra page that is just dedicated to existing in the space. And what this does is it allows you to like really settle the reader in the experience and the place that they are in, um, and is in kind of a different way than establishing shots are, because one single big illustration that showcases a lot of things and has a lot of information usually only showcases one aspect of it, whereas this you can get kind of closer in with the nitty gritty of it and really I guess activate the senses of your reader. Like looking at this panel for me, or sorry, go back the page. Like yeah, I can almost hear the water right as I'm looking and hear the birds flapping and that kind of thing. And there's not even that many lines, but just because they've added those extra panels in there and I'm reading it slower, I'm taking the time to think about it.
Yeah, kind of what was mentioned earlier too. Mike Mignola is the master of doing this, right? You look at this page from Hellboy again, like most of these panels aren't related to the plot or the sequence of events, but what they do is they bring us into this world and this scene really, really effectively and give us time to sit and investigate. By having these close-ups, essentially what you're doing is you're just highlighting little interesting things. It's kind of like if you go to a museum and they have this big old thing and a curator comes and grabs something down and is like, look at this. now look at this, and you can appreciate it a lot more because you're able to get a lot closer to it. And it also makes it a lot easier on the comic artist, because then instead of cramming all this detail into one big establishing shot that you then have to go into and decipher or you miss, we are able to kind of guide you through this curated experience of exploring and seeing the world. And it really, really increases the immersion, because again, you're interacting with the environment not as a spectator, but as someone within the environment. And I think it's really, really fun, and it does so much. I could look at this page for hours. It's so good. Oh, okay. I'll let you talk about this one.
So we both absolutely adore Mobius, by the way, but I do think that the level of detail that you have can either hurt or help you. And I think this is maybe an example of where it's maybe a little bit confusing. So when you are doing establishing shots and this kind of work, and this is an action scene, but I think that you can go a little overboard with the environment. And what this has essentially done is, because he's been treating every single panel as if it's like this fully rendered image, it's really slowed down the action for me. So just be aware that action or the detail affects the speed of reading, and so that can negatively impact the pacing of your action, or positively. If you wanted to slow down your action, you can increase your detail, or whatever. I'm not going to say that there's like a right way to do it or a wrong way to do it. But for me, at least, like this level of detail on this page makes it a little bit more confusing, and it takes a really long time for me to process it. So I'm not as invested in the action.
Which I kind of spends. There's no way to say that this is bad, but that's the effect that it has. So as you go into telling the stories you want to tell, that's something to be aware of. I think especially amateur comic artists tend to get a little into your head, because we have this idea that, like, to make something look good and be appealing and look impressive, et cetera, it has to have a bunch of detail and like fine rendering. Which, again, there are some really beautiful cases of this, but what that does is it tends to distract from the comic itself, if that makes sense. There's a really fantastic DC comic, Kingdom Come, that's gorgeous, and it's all these super like hand done. I think they're gouache paintings, like realistic, super painterly, and it's really, really beautiful as a piece of art, but it is a little bit hard to digest as a comic. I love it. It's gorgeous. I look at it frequently, but when you have that, again, it's a series of trade-offs, kind of with most of the things we've been talking about. And so it's something to be aware of. And especially if you're just starting out, or if you're newer to making comics, I wouldn't stress detail. Also, because it's going to make it take a long time, and you're going to be tired, and it's going to be a lot harder to feel like you can finish anything. But especially when you look at, like, comparing the last page to a page like this,
Mm-hmm. Which is it's just so much more clear. I mean, to me,
yeah.
Not that this is better, right? Because it's a different reading experience, right? But you can get a lot of mileage, at least with storytelling, through very, very simple drawings. So don't fall into the trap of everything has to be so detailed that it's like detailed is better.
Yeah. This is an interesting case study. Luke Pearson is really good. We actually saw one of his other things. I like how we have a lot of Luke Pearson in here. I just
no Tim McCrane, Luke Pearson is
we know Tim. We have more Luke Pearson than we do Mike Mignola, because we have 3 different pages by Luke Pearson and only 2 Hellboy pages.
It's because Hilda's awesome.
Hilda's really good.
Hilda's awesome.
So, like, this is an example. Like, if you look at this page, there is a lot going on. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of panels. There's quite a bit of text. And it takes you a little bit to work through, right? You have to kind of slow down and, like, break things down and process it in order to get through, in order to understand what's happening, and in order to, like, follow the story, which is fine. But it is interesting when you compare that to kind of later Hilda pages like this one, where we still have a lot of detail, but we have this scene that's intentionally meant to be a little overstimulating and jarring and confusing. Because I don't know if you've ever been a child lost in a crowd, but everything is moving. It's so hard to tell what's going on because it's shifting and it's people you don't know who you can't distinguish. It's overwhelming, and that's kind of how this page feels, but intentionally so. Whereas this page feels a little overwhelming, but I don't think that was what the intention was. It could have been, but that is kind of the effect that I have on it. So even phenomenal comic artists get better as they go, is kind of what we're learning. But also to say that like there are cases where having a lot of detail can be used to intentionally break the legibility of the page, right? For an effect. And here's a great example of that. Okay.
Right. This is an example of using detail to break legibility.
Well, so this Hilda page.
Oh no, this one was okay. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
I was like,
sorry.
I don't remember thinking about that with Berserk.
No,
one thing
Berserk
I was
one
going to
is
say
for a
about
different concept.
Yeah, one thing that I was going to say about the Hilda page too, for me at least, that makes this one a lot more legible than the last one is just the use of color. Like the simplification in the color makes a lot of the line work easier to read, even though there's a lot of extraneous detail. Because it's just red, and then there's the blue of Hilda, and so you can track her throughout the entirety of the page. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can move on. I don't know why that was weird for me. Then the other thing too to think about too is that generally on comic pages, you will group panels based off of what is going on. A good rule of thumb is to just organize detail or information in this way. So this Berserk page is very, very obvious. You have one character with a single interaction on the top half of the page, and then there's another character on the bottom half of the page. So it's changing perspectives between these two characters, and it's keeping the action localized to their respective elements. And you don't they didn't have to organize the page in this way, but it's very, very effective because you are separating in the reader's mind, oh, this is about this character, and these next few panels are about this other character.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a simple way, as you have multiple ideas and multiple perspectives in a page, to make it clear. This is another page from Heaven's Hymn, where we kind of a bit of a similar thing, where our top two panels, right, are conversation. Our middle three panels are kind of establishing actions, and then the third one is our big cliffhanger action. And so it helps to feel good when things are organized, is essentially it. But this, still talking about the organization of the page, if you want to create narrative tension, which is a really great way to engage and continue developing interest from your readers, making them care, you want to ask questions and give answers, right? And so each panel is, you want to be answering the question of the last panel and posing the question for the next panel to answer. So even this first one, like these first two where we just have people talking, we the question is like, oh, how is he going to respond to this diss? Okay, he's not backing down. We have this action that is met with this action, is met with this action, and then we end the page with this big kind of cliffhanger action. It's like, oh, we're right on the cusp of something like bigger happening, and leaving that at the end of the page makes it hard to not want to turn the page, right? To not want to see what is happening on the next page. This is another thing, especially to think about as you get going, when if you are making a book specifically, right, or even if you're doing like a scroll style web comic, you want to have the moments where you're asking your audience to do something, whether that's click on the next episode or turn the page, to be a moment that entices them to do so. right? You want to make it hard to not turn that page or to not click next episode. Not in a like predatory, like you can't click away, ha ha ha, I have your life, but in a way that like you want them to be engaged. Your audiences like being engaged, and authors like having engaged audiences. It's mutually beneficial. It's not a predatory kind of, I'm clickbaiting you into here with never resolving the plot, but by continually asking interesting questions narratively and then answering them, or providing answers that don't entirely answer everything, right, is another option. This is not necessarily happening in this page. But that's kind of a good way to frame how you're doing it and how you're establishing it, especially as you get into actually organizing the pages as a book, which you, if that's the end goal, you should be thinking about from the beginning, just because that's going to make it so much easier when you get to actually doing that. You won't have to reformat everything, which would be a nightmare. Yeah, this is just another great example. Also a great example of establishing shots. But yeah, there are questions being asked and answered with each shot, even if they're not explicit like the last one's like someone off screen is saying something.
Yeah, but that makes me want to turn the page because I want to see who's doing it. And going back to the Hilda example, Hilda has the same thing. You see her walking in and she looks up. We want to see what she's looking at. So she's looking at a crowd. Okay, what's she going to do next? Okay, she's running towards the crowd. Who's she looking for? She's looking for her mom. Is she going to see her mom in any of the crowd? Oh, she sees something. She pushes through, and it ends with a cliffhanger of what is she looking at? We don't know. So I want to turn the page and find out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, similarly, this is from Non-Player by Nate Simpson, which I actually haven't read, so I don't know what happens after this page, but I want to. But like, this is a good example of doing that also in the writing, which again, we're not focusing on today, but merging it all together, they have a dialogue that includes things that give us clues about what's going on, without telling us everything, right? We have this guy reporting to this girl who's up in this thing, and he calls her sister. It's like, okay, so there's a relationship, but then why is he down there? Why is she up there? What is that relationship like? Who are these characters? And it continues, and then they have like specifics of the world. And this is a really nice thing that you can do, even just with sci-fi and fantasy, especially if you have things that are bizarre or fascinating or interesting. Or honestly, you can do this with any story. If you have something that just visually in and of itself is interesting and makes people ask questions, like this creature that they're writing at the very end, that looks like it's being seen through a spyglass, we're like, okay, what's that creature? Also, who's spying on them, right? Like, this is the brother, who's looking at them? And so like we establish these questions, and you can do that. Again, it doesn't just have to be big, like someone's over here. You can just do that with interesting things that people say, what is that? Why is that there? If it ends on there's a severed hand on the ground, there's questions, right? Like we're continually asking questions. One of the best things you can be as a writer and as a comic creator is curious, because that just trains you to engage your audience in a meaningful way. Yeah. Do you have anything more to add before moving on to this from this one, Spencer?
I think the only thing that I would add as well is delaying answers to those questions also just keeps your readers on the edge of their seats. Like if this is kind of more of a writing tip, but like if you start out a story with a big question that you're like, oh, I want to know how this character is going to get out of the situation, or how they're going to do this or whatever, and then you keep delaying that by giving your reader more questions to answer and then satiating some of them, but then keeping the big questions like unanswered till the end. That keeps them engaged throughout the whole story.
Oh, hi, Tio. We got to see Tio for a little bit. Yeah. Okay. The last thing is unconventional layouts. And this is one that we can't speak too much on because the whole point, it kind of is breaking the rules, if that makes sense, and just really playing with the format, which is not something that either of us do a whole lot. But it is interesting, and a new space that has been opened up kind of more recently in the comics world. that you can do some fun stuff with for certain sequences and such. So we can just go through these unless you want to talk.
Yeah, no, these are just examples of stuff that we think is kind of cool. Like it's cool that there's like a specific pathway for the character or like for the reader to go, and they're connected through just the way that the white space around it, I think is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another really interesting one, where we have one environment and tons of the same character, and it's just broken up in panels so that we can get this one's really fascinating. Honestly, it's really just interesting to look at.
Yeah, because you kind of get the aspects like you're just existing in the scene. I love how there's like characters doing stuff in the peripheries, but then you can still kind of follow what the one character is doing as they're sneaking out. But I do think the risk that you come up with when you start doing really experimental things is that a reader might not know how to read it, and so they might not understand what you're trying to say. But that being said, I think it's this kind of space is where we really start getting new conventions and like pushing what kinds of stories can even be told,
And I will say
just there's value to it.
Yeah, and I will say also, like, there's no way that Hope Larson didn't take time to understand the existing conventions before creating her own in this, right? Like, there's still the fundamental principles of movement left to right that we can trace, right? You follow the lines of the character, of contrast, of clarity and hierarchy that make this all readable. So even though it's a completely different convention, a lot of the same principles and rules are still there. It's just tweaked a little bit when you break it down, right, which is really interesting.
This is an interesting one where it's I don't know, a cross section of a house. Like it's one location and characters interacting in different rooms, but it's telling a story through that.
Yeah. Will Eisner is really good with this.
Yeah, one person to really study just in general as well is, I mean, Will Eisner was like the godfather of the graphic novel. Like he kind of invented the medium in a lot of ways. And one thing that he does constantly is he'll create an interaction between the environment and the characters and the picture plane, where he's always cross-sectioning in the environment and bringing characters from one thing to another. It creates this very sort of dreamlike quality to his work. So he's definitely worth studying.
Yeah.
An oldie but goodie.
Yeah. This one's just a fun, kind of like choose your own adventure case where you like, depending on which character you're following, you can choose their actions through the story, and it'll take you to different things on the next page. It doesn't make a lot of sense without the broader context of the rest of the book, but it's another way that you can push boundaries and have interesting exchanges, throughout it all, which is just, yeah, it's a lot to process, but it's really cool.
And then this one, I'm not even sure exactly how to read it, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I have no idea how to read it.
Chris Ware is another person to study if you want to learn in conventional layouts, and his all his comics kind of look like these diagrams where it's a little difficult to know exactly what's going on, but I think is worth the look.
Yeah. And just as we're wrapping up, these are just some other examples of pages that we thought were cool that we didn't put in but wanted to show everyone because we thought they were dope. But yeah, we don't know what this is from or who did it, but it's really great use of color. A really cool way to have paneling that's just a series of the same rectangle in a grid that doesn't feel stagnant or flat at any point or even boring. It's really interesting.
The other thing that I
effect
think
that
is
it
really
has.
cool the other thing I think was really cool about this is it's only using aspect to aspect ratios until that last line, right, where she runs out, and it's like a moment to moment transition, because it's kind of like this slow motion run out. But you piece together the whole scene of this kind of like this murder that's happened, only through just fragments of the scene, which I think is just really cool storytelling.
Yeah, it's so good. This is a page by Matthias Basla, who is phenomenal. This is a really fun example of cool like jagged frames for an action scene. It heightens the dynamics while also making it kind of exist in its own interesting liminal space, which is really cool. But yeah, I don't know if there's any more you wanted to add on this page, Spencer. But
I just love the colors too. They're
it's
so
so good,
deep and awesome.
Yeah, this last little bit is mostly just gonna be us showing you a page and being like, "Ooh, it's so good." So, yeah, the last one is this sequence by Jake Wyatt from Necropolis, which is so good.
Really goose. Oh, sorry, what?
Oh, you go, and then I'll share my story.
Okay. I just think like really good use of directionality and camera angles and environment and basically just everything we've been talking about.
And colors. If you guys want a colors workshop or thing, we'll also do that. I think this is a lot of fun, and I don't know if we'll have as big of a presentation. We might do more demos and stuff too, if people would be interested in that. In part also because that'll be easy for me because I'm always working on Heaven's Hymn, so I can just pull up whatever page I'm working on and be like, look, this is how I color it. But yeah, no, it's really good. So Jake Wyatt's one of the biggest influences on like my style specifically for like Heaven's Hymn, like and what I want to do. It's kind of like there's a bunch of artists that I could link, but he's a big one. And I was at a small zine fair a year ago, and I had a little zine of the first chapter of my comic, and someone came up and like, wow, this looks a lot like Necropolis by Jake Wyatt, and I was like, oh my goodness, wow. It was one of the like biggest compliments anyone's given me. I also had someone compare me to Mobius a few months ago, which was also crazy because I am nowhere near Mobius. It was a kind of humbling if I'm being honest, but
that's awesome.
This is, I believe, is the last page. So does anybody have any questions or comments or other like ideas to share about this whole? Gonna pop that out so you can look at our beautiful faces. Okay, well, while we wait to see if anybody has any questions, if you guys are interested and want to see like our work, what we have done, you can read my comic Heaven's Hymn. It's there's a link in the description of the live, and you can also check out Spencer's comic on his Instagram, which is also linked in the live, and follow both of us and check out our stuff, so that we can, get it out there and tell more stories to everybody. But yeah, do you have any last things you want to say, Spencer?
No, just thanks everyone for coming. This was really fun. I think I look forward to doing this in the future.
Woohoo! Yeah, we'll definitely be together, the two of us, doing more things. I got to figure out what I want the live streams to look like on this channel going forward, because we might want to just make our own channel for the two of us if we're gonna do so it's less my channel and guest Spencer, and more just it's us.
Right. Yeah, we can figure that out.
We'll figure that out. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Hopefully things were helpful, and go make comics. I'll be here again next week. I don't know what I'm going to be doing for the live next week. Maybe we'll talk about world building. Maybe we'll do another one of the two of us, or more paleo art or something like I've done on other streams. So yeah. Okay. we will see you guys later. Have a great week. Bye.
Bye.